car before I call the real authorities." Greg stood there for another beat, looking at Karen across the street, who was filming everything on her phone. Then he mumbled something about documenting the incident and retreated to his vehicle, which stalled twice before he got it to drive off. About 30 minutes later, things took another sharp turn. Karen called the actual police. Not the AutoZone rejects this time, real law enforcement. 2 cruisers pulled up with lights flashing, and she ran to them like a child meeting Santa Claus at the mall. She was waving her phone, still recording, and yelling over and over that a group of unauthorized males in military attire had unlawfully occupied public space. The officers approached cautiously but professionally. One of them asked for an explanation. I stepped off the porch, greeted them with a handshake, and explained the situation clearly. Jack handed over his sheriff's ID. And then, like fate had scripted the perfect twist, the second officer tilted his head and smiled wide. "Corporal Gaines," he said. I looked closer. It was Ryan, another Marine from my unit. I hadn't seen him since the deployment, but the moment I heard his voice I remembered everything. We shook hands, then embraced like brothers do when time disappears. The officers huddled for a moment, speaking quietly, then walked back toward Karen. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw the change in her face as they explained the reality of her situation. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The moment she realized that not only was I not some porch squatter, but that I had more legal ground to stand on than she ever would, it was delicious. She didn't retreat though. Oh no. She stormed away down the street, muttering something about going above local jurisdiction. As the officers drove off, Ryan gave me a knowing look and said, "You sure know how to pick a neighborhood." I laughed. It picked me. But something Ryan said stuck. That night I started digging. I looked up property records, zoning maps, and city council minute. And something interesting came up. The so-called HOA Karen was referencing? It didn't exist legally. But there was a petition filed 2 months ago, an unofficial application to start a new HOA, with Karen listed as the acting president. It had been denied. Flat out rejected by the county. That explained her desperation. She wasn't part of a real HOA, she was trying to invent one, take control, and start enforcing her personal rules on the neighborhood by brute force. Even crazier? The records showed she didn't even own the house she was living in. She was a tenant. And not a particularly good one either. 3 noise complaints, 1 dispute about digging without a permit, and an old civil suit for unpermitted community beautification. I sat back in my chair, phone still in hand, porch light buzzing softly above me. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about porch colors or loitering. This was about power. Karen wanted to control people, and the only way she thought she could do that was by pretending she already did. And now she dragged in a whole squad of Marines. I smiled to myself. She had no clue what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. Not from my house, not even from a neighbor doing construction. It was Karen. She was nailing wooden posts into the ground near the sidewalk, right on the edge of my property line. Curious, I stepped outside and watched from my porch with a cup of fresh coffee in hand. Scout followed me, yawning and stretching as if he already knew the day would be filled with nonsense. Karen was dressed like she was about to appear on a reality TV show about delusional neighborhood leaders. Bright purple visor, clipboard slung over her arm, and a t-shirt that said President, Founding HOA Committee. She had installed 3 wooden stakes, tied them together with red tape, and posted a laminated paper on the middle one. From a distance, I could already tell it was another one of her homemade flyers. As I approached, she held up her hand like a traffic cop. "This is a restricted zone now," she announced. "You're not allowed to interfere with official HOA boundary marking." I blinked, genuinely speechless for a second. Boundary marking? She tapped the laminated paper. "The community has decided to implement territorial zoning for shared-use porch regions and pedestrian welcome areas. This porch has been marked as a conflict zone and is currently under review for public reassignment. I stared at her, then at the sad little triangle of tape tied between the stakes like a kindergarten science fair project. It took every ounce of strength not to burst into laughter. Karen, I said calmly, you do realize that you are building imaginary borders on property that doesn't belong to you? She smirked. As acting president of the pending HOA, I have the authority to make preliminary designations. This area will soon be integrated. You can't integrate what you don't own, I said, but she just waved me off and marched back to her house with her clipboard, like a queen returning to her castle after declaring a siege. That was the final straw. I pulled out my phone and messaged the group chat again. Operation Porch Shield is a go. Assemble. Within the hour, 3 more members of my old Marine unit rolled up, one by one. First came Mike, who now worked as a federal investigator. He brought donuts because of course he did. Then Tyler, a cybersecurity specialist who spent 10 years detecting fraud, arrived with a drone camera and a tripod. Finally, Evan, our former squad medic turned MP, showed up wearing his uniform and carrying a folding lawn chair. He set it up on the porch beside me and sat like we were at a tailgate party. Karen re-emerged from her house, stunned to see the porch had now transformed into a Marine reunion zone. 4 men in varying uniforms and badges, calmly drinking coffee and talking like it was a Sunday afternoon at a VFW picnic. Tyler's drone took off and buzzed quietly over the neighborhood, capturing aerial footage of Karen's stakes and her makeshift conflict zone. She came storming across the street again, fuming. You can't gather like this without HOA clearance, she shouted. You're making the neighbors feel unsafe. Which neighbors? I asked. The ones who waved and brought us muffins? Or the ones laughing at your flyers on the community Facebook page? Karen's face turned crimson. You're staging a military intimidation tactic. This is coercion. Mike stood up and calmly pulled out a folder. You've been issuing fraudulent notices, trespassing, impersonating an authority figure, and attempting to enforce laws that don't exist. Want me to show you what a real federal violation looks like? Karen stumbled backward, clearly shaken. This isn't over, she muttered. You'll be hearing from my legal advisor. Oh, said Evan, standing up. Tell him to stop by. We'll be here. All day. Karen stormed off again, this time visibly rattled. We all shared a laugh, then went back to drinking coffee and catching up. But this wasn't just a show of force. It was a reminder that when people try to bully others with lies and fake authority, there's always a point where the truth comes roaring in, and this time, it came in with uniforms, credentials, and calm defiance. Later that afternoon, Karen returned with a new plan. This time, she brought Greg again, the so-called compliance officer, along with a new partner, some guy in khakis and a golf shirt who looked like he'd been dragged out of a barbecue. Greg once again wore his reflective vest and carried his infamous clipboard. The new guy had a camera and started filming from across the street. This is an official recording of a neighborhood violation, Greg announced. These men are unlawfully occupying a disputed area and are now subject to a porch shutdown order. I stood up slowly, walked to the edge of my property, and held up my phone. Do you really want to go on camera again, Greg? Because last time didn't end well for you. Then I turned the camera on him. Greg hesitated. His partner lowered the camera. Mike stood beside me and calmly pulled out a printed cease and desist letter, already prepared based on Karen's flyers and previous impersonation. By recording and threatening enforcement action under a non-existent authority, Mike said, you're violating state impersonation laws and entering harassment territory. This letter outlines the legal consequences. If you don't leave now, we'll call the sheriff. Again. Greg turned to Karen, who had stayed a few feet back. You said this was legit, he muttered. Karen shouted, stand your ground. This is about order. But Greg and his friend didn't want any part of it anymore. They turned around, muttering apologies, and left. Karen stood alone, flustered, yelling at no one in particular. For the first time, she looked like she knew the hill she was defending wasn't just crumbling, it had never existed in the first place. The final laugh came not from us, but from fate. As Karen turned to head home, she realized her car, parked half on my lawn and half in front of a clearly marked fire hydrant, was being hooked up by a real city tow truck. One of the neighbors, a retired firefighter, had called it in. We watched as the tow truck driver shrugged at Karen's protest and flipped on the winch. The car was hoisted up and rolled away down the street as she screamed after it. "This is harassment. This is illegal," she cried. The tow truck driver didn't even respond. Just drove away slowly as Karen stood there like someone who just lost the final piece of her imaginary empire. The silence afterward was thick with poetic justice. As the sun dipped low in the sky and the last of the day's tension faded, I looked around at my brothers, my porch, and the peaceful stretch of land I called home. Karen had tried to claim it, control it, twist it into something she could rule, but instead, she built herself a stage for public humiliation. And the curtain had just dropped. The neighborhood felt different after the incident with the tow truck. People who had been quietly observing from behind curtains were now waving when they walked past, some stopping by just to say they appreciated what we were doing. One older couple even brought over a peach cobbler with a note that read, "Thank you for defending the porch." It was funny how something as simple as sitting on a porch had become a line in the sand. For Karen, it had been a battle of control. For the rest of us, it was a reminder of what happens when you try to push good people around with fake power and a cheap clipboard. But Karen wasn't done yet. I knew it the second I saw a white envelope tucked into my mailbox the next morning.